This is Feng Zhou, a young man who got reincarnated. Decades ago, the world went through a bizarre mutation. Monsters and evil spirits invaded the earthly plane. To survive, humanity had to awaken classes and master abilities. The same old cliché. And that's when the golden age of dudes with powers kicked off. Years later, at a school, the Grand Awakening ceremony was about to begin, and Fang was finally ready to discover his true strength. That's when the instructor calls him to the altar, and the kid steps forward. In the back, some girls gossip, saying he'd make a gorgeous priest. Meanwhile, a few jealous guys grumble that looks don't win battles. The instructor looks over the boy's file and sees he's a model orphan. He's stunned by the candidate's perfect grades. Fang Zhou then places his hand on the crystal. Suddenly, a massive golden glow explodes, but soon the light starts getting swallowed by a black smoke. An explosion of darkness rips through the sky and covers the entire school. And out of nowhere, a shadowy army of undead monsters appears. Alright, I guess we found our very own Sung Jin Woo. The young man raises his arm, and a screen appears confirming his awakening as a necromancer. The crowd's reaction is instant, and several students start laughing in his face. To the blonde kid, necromancer was the most ridiculous class of them all. Little do they know that a necromancer's true power goes way beyond that. That's because, normally, necromancers have a really hard time connecting to the realm of the dead. But our protagonist was different from anyone there, having access to his own personal stats. He then reveals the activation of an exclusive system. His reincarnation cheat had finally kicked in after 18 years. The system quickly warns him that he's earned a skeleton clone and can level up by devouring other souls. No doubt about it, that was the perfect tool custom-made for a true necromancer. Wasting no time, he activates his first ability and begins the summoning. Before him appears the Skull King straight out of Yu-Gi-Oh!, who serves as his personal avatar in the underworld. The kid realizes that, by defeating monsters in there, he could bring them back to the real world. That way, the entire realm of the dead would become his private hunting ground. But leaving exploration for later, he decides to test his clone's power out in reality. So then, a huge magic circle appears in the school courtyard, and from the glow of the spell, the imposing skeletal creature materializes. That was his strongest summon. Right behind him, the instructor mourns the kid's class and calls the next student to the altar. Several girls run over to console Fang, praising the skeleton's scary style. That leaves the crew of jealous jerks even more furious. The blonde kid then decides to act behind his back, planning to destroy the summon to slow his rival down. The scumbag pulls out a wrist weapon and fires a deadly dart, but the creature senses the attack immediately, and Fang just closes his eyes, not even bothering to dodge. The next second, the blonde kid panics when he notices his projectile has simply vanished. To his horror, the skeletal giant appears right behind him, and giving him no time to react, the monster lands a brutal hit, sending the loser slamming into the ground. The jealous guy can barely believe what just happened. He tries to get up and begs Fang to stop the attack. Lu Renjia can't figure out how that skeleton managed to block an attack from a blind spot, but he quickly assumes that, being a summoner, Fang's physical body must be extremely weak. With that cowardly thought in mind, the jealous guy charges at him, but without moving a muscle, our necromancer grabs the fool's wrist with absurd ease. Fang warns that his opponent way overestimated his own abilities, and unloads a devastating punch right in the middle of his face. Lu Renjia's body flips violently onto the grass, freaking out all the students. That was easy, Fang says. Bored with his rival's weakness, our necromancer decides to walk away. Right after, the instructor shows up, asking about the commotion, and the students spill the beans about the beatdown. The blonde kid's buddies rush to carry him off. Even all beaten up, the jealous guy swears revenge. Some time passes, and night finally falls over the school. Hidden in the dark hallways of the school so he won't be disturbed, our boy pulls up his system's interface. He decides it's the perfect moment to test and experience the feared realm of the dead firsthand. The kid knows this is the only way a necromancer can truly level up, by devouring other souls. Even knowing the place is extremely dangerous, he's willing to take the risks. After all, he'd waited 18 long years for this opportunity, and he wasn't about to waste it. A mystical light envelops the boy, kicking off the spiritual transfer process. Suddenly, the scenery shifts into a gloomy swamp full of bones. Fang quickly realizes he's now controlling his clone's body directly. Checking his new monster stats, he discovers he has a passive weapon crafting ability. He tries to figure out how this technique of forging weapons from enemy bones works, and he quickly remembers this was exactly the trick his clone used to block the dart earlier. So Fang sits down to craft a basic weapon. That's when, in the middle of the mist, a giant two-headed wolf appears. But our boy uses the clone's reflexes to dodge with a roll. Well, the realm of the dead is way more dangerous than he imagined. But the beast is fast and manages to pin the skeleton's foot to the ground before he can react. Fang decides to counterattack using the strength of his legs, and he throws a full-force roundhouse kick straight at the creature's jaw. To his surprise, the impact has zero effect, and the beast stays completely intact. Realizing that this bony body is still really hard to control, he just barely dodges another bite. That's when the kid spots a pile of old bones on the ground and gets an idea. As the beast leaps to shred him, he runs toward the wreckage. Activating his special ability, he makes the bones float and mold themselves into a sharp scythe. With the new weapon in hand, the skeleton lands a clean slash through the air. But the wolf takes the opening and bites down on one of his arms. At that very moment, in the real world, Fang Zhou feels absurd pain and starts coughing up blood. Any damage taken by his spiritual clone also affects his real body. Back in the underworld, he ignores the pain and focuses on the head he just cut off. He decides to absorb the beast's remains to strengthen his own powers. Using his weapon crafting technique again, he channels the energy from the monster's carcass, and he creates a skeletal whip sword. The kid is blown away by how useful and versatile his system abilities are. That's when a mysterious blue flame starts floating over the beast's ashes. Suddenly, an uncontrollable, overwhelming hunger takes over Fang's mind. He feels that he needs to devour that soul to begin his evolution. Without hesitating, the skeleton opens his mouth and swallows the mystical flame. At that same instant, a notification tells him his physical attributes have been upgraded. His strength stat goes up, and the system shows he also collected spiritual energy points. A screen explains that these points are used to upgrade skills and equipment. With that, our necromancer realizes that place is the perfect paradise for him to become unstoppable. The goal there was simple: explore, hunt, devour, and evolve non-stop. Fang knew that as long as he kept hunting in the underworld, his combat power could grow completely without limits. Soon, the skeleton runs into a common undead soldier, cannon fodder of the realm. So he uses his weapon crafting ability and creates a sharp bone spear. The clone attacks, wiping out the minions and stealing their agility stats. Every kill guaranteed more constitution and spiritual energy for his evolution. Little by little, his skeletal warrior's body starts gaining golden armor and horns. He becomes way more imposing, but the kid knows that's still not enough. The next day, the sun rises over Haicheng High. While walking through the hallways, the kid gets stopped by a classmate. The girl, named Bai Xiaochan, notices that his hands are covered in blood. The little blonde girl begs him not to hurt himself just because he awakened a weak class. Well, that leaves him totally embarrassed. He tries to play it off, making up that it was just a silly scratch. That's when the school bell rings. Taking the cue, he suggests they hurry to meditation class. But on the way, the kid coughs up blood again, which sends the little blonde girl into a panic, wanting to take him to the nurse. The system warns him that too much time in the underworld overloaded his body. However, something on the holographic screen catches his eye. He notices that his own human physical stats have also gone up dramatically. On top of that, a new skill deduction option has appeared. He wonders if he'd be able to create his own spells, just like the elite warriors. A little later, the two of them finally reach the main classroom building. Once inside the meditation room, all the students take their seats. That's when a beautiful red-haired mage introduces herself as Shen Hongyu, the teacher in charge. She explains that basic meditation is essential for manifesting the power of awakened classes. The redhead says this technique boosts spiritual power, serving as the foundation for all skills. And she brags a bit, saying that even a genius like her took 2 whole weeks to master the first step. While the teacher rambles on, a notification pops up for the kid, detecting a secret technique. Without thinking twice, he clicks the option to confirm learning the special meditation ability. Instantly, a mystical green energy connects his mind directly to his skeletal clone's body. He reads the details and discovers that the method involves visualizing a skeleton's anatomy to train. For him, that was the easiest thing in the world, since all he had to do was look at his own spiritual clone. And the best part, the clone would keep meditating on its own all day, guaranteeing training 24 hours a day. The system warns him about the boost to his mental power, but alerts him that entering the underworld drains that energy. Determined to get stronger before class ends, he starts a new transfer to the realm of the dead. Back in the gloomy swamp, the skeleton spots another undead soldier wandering around. With a quick, clean attack, he takes out the target and absorbs its endurance stats. Realizing he can hunt freely to keep stacking power, Fang gets pumped. The system notifies him that one of his skills hit max level, letting him create a new technique. But this spell evolution process can only be done while inside the underworld. Wasting no time, the clone joins his hands together and starts fusing his powers. The holographic screen begins analyzing the request in the middle of flames. The process finishes with total success, generating the legendary technique of the flying bone spear. The ability lets him launch highly piercing death projectiles at his enemies. To his surprise, the system also unlocks a talent tree loaded with defensive branches. That's when he spots some smaller monsters running around and decides to use them as test subjects. Dude, I know they're just skeletons, but I feel so bad for them. The warrior conjures the new mystical weapon. The colossal spear falls from the sky like a meteor, obliterating the creatures instantly. The clone admires the damage, since this power blows away any basic apprentice spell. However, he notices that the stat rewards from these weaker monsters are starting to drop. The kid realizes the system won't let him level up easy, forcing him into more dangerous zones. Even so, he decides to clean out that starter area before pushing deeper. Hyped by his discoveries, the kid starts cackling like a maniac in the middle of class. That's when the teacher gets ticked off and asks why he was laughing to himself. Lu Renjia takes the chance to humiliate his rival, saying Fang Zhou would never be able to meditate. The rest of the class agrees, whispering that Necromancer's meditation technique is incomplete and useless. The teacher also loses her patience, accusing the kid of wasting the whole class's time. To make it worse, the jealous blonde kid proudly shows off his progress, floating the handle of a fire dagger in his hand. He brags, saying Fang must have finally understood the difference between their classes. But our necromancer claps back, saying his rival's cultivation speed is pretty mediocre. Furious, the blonde kid jumps up shouting that a failure who can't even meditate has no right to speak. But suddenly, a massive, terrifying dark aura explodes from Fang's body. The pressure is so intense that the teacher has to yell for Lu Renjia to focus so he doesn't collapse. She demands an explanation for the kid's aggression, and he replies that he just wanted the blonde guy out of his way. Fang warns that he'd only do that to show his real progress in meditation. The students can barely believe that a mere necromancer could pull off real results. Ignoring them, Fang closes his eyes and activates his newly acquired skeletal meditation technique. At the same instant, a wild burst of spiritual wind sweeps through the entire classroom. The teacher is completely shocked witnessing the sheer magnitude of that overwhelming power. Behind Fang Zhou, the imposing silhouette of the warrior appears, proving he's way above any so-called genius. That's when the classroom door swings open, and the combat instructor walks in. The old man praises the display and announces that, because of this, tomorrow they'd have a practical test. The students complain that they're not ready to fight. Meanwhile, Lu Renjia thinks it's great and promises to wreck the kid on the battlefield. Later, our necromancer heads back to the gloomy swamp of the underworld to keep grinding. Thanks to his successful meditation, the time he can spend in the realm of the dead has grown a lot. Aware of tomorrow's test, the skeleton grips his weapon and starts hunting until he pushes past his limits. He charges furiously at a group of undead. The warrior hurls his piercing spears, impaling every creature that crosses his path. With a devastating combo of strikes, he wipes out entire hordes in a matter of seconds. Hours later, Fang is satisfied after burning through all his energy for the day. At that same moment, a system notification tells him Fang Zhou's professional level went up, strengthening his clone. The skeleton warrior confirms the upgrade, so the clone reaches intermediate apprentice level, gaining new stats and a special heavy attack ability. This new technique lets him unleash absurd destructive force based on the user's raw strength. Knowing he could now clear the underworld way faster with this power, the skeleton pats himself on the back. But suddenly, the warrior's spiritual body starts flickering and losing strength. He realizes, too late, that he focused so much on stats that he burned through all his mental energy at once. Now over at Haicheng High's sports courtyard, feeling a killer headache, the kid wakes up on a bench. The adorable Bai Xiaochan comes over worried, and he plays it off, saying he'd just been training too much lately. Out of nowhere, Lu Renjia walks by laughing and mocking, calling the necromancer class weak trash. The little blonde girl loses her patience and shouts back, asking why they're always messing with the kid. But Fang Zhou isn't intimidated and challenges him to a fight. The jerk pulls out his shiny dagger and swears he only needs one hit to humiliate our necromancer. But before the fight can even start, Professor Lu Hu suddenly shows up and orders everyone to stop immediately. The big guy lectures the blonde kid, reminding him that they train to fight demons, not each other. Then, he tells Fang Zhou to put in work at the practical training if he wants to keep up his solid meditation performance. That makes the kid feel like the professor is secretly trying to look out for him. Right after, the instructor orders all the students to gather at the center of the field. He asks one of the assistants to bring out the test equipment for the class. Minutes later, the professor reveals a horned mechanical robot and explains that it was a test dummy for measuring strength. Lu Hu breaks down the dummy's defense level. Hold on, is that thing seriously flipping us off? One of the students taps the robot's metal head, doubting that old piece of scrap could take their attacks. But the instructor lands a solid punch on the dummy and assures them that no freshman has ever managed to break one. And he throws down a challenge, saying that if anyone manages to break the robot today with their own physical strength, he'd personally hand out 20 guild contribution points. Fang Zhou gets interested right away, knowing those points work like currency to buy items and rare spells. Immediately, a huge line of students forms to try their hand at the physical trial. The first in line, a fire mage, starts conjuring flames around his hands, and he fires an explosive fireball straight at the test robot's chest. But the result is way below expectations, and with only 48 points on the board, the kid gets an earful. Right after, other students try their luck with swords and arrows, but none of them make it past the 50-point mark. Seeing how weak the class is overall, the professor wraps up the common class test and calls the special classes up to the altar. Knowing that earning the professor's bonus points would be a mission impossible, the regular students start crying. Our necromancer quickly starts working out a strategy, wondering if his summon's continuous strikes could stack damage. Before he can test his theory, the jealous blonde kid shows up to taunt him, mocking him and saying his attack power must be the worst of all. To prove he's superior, the jerk runs toward the test robot, itching to show off his new assassin ability. With a quick dagger strike, he hits the target with precision, sending the machine's counter straight up to 80 points. He brags about the result, but the little blonde girl quickly points her finger in his face and warns that he's not the only one with a special class at this school. Ignoring their bickering, the instructor calls up the next student, Yi Fan, for his physical demonstration. The crowd remembers that the guy was handpicked by the higher-ups for having the coveted Demon Hunter class. The kid extends his hand and materializes a huge curved blade. He leaps and lands a brutal strike against the machine. However, the scoreboard shows only 65 points, leaving some students disappointed with the supposed prodigy. But the kid isn't having it, and, with his eyes glowing, promises that the show isn't over. At that very moment, he launches into a frantic combo, quickly bringing the score from 69 to 88, and finally hitting the max mark. The instructor confirms an impressive 100 damage points. Seeing that, Fang Zhou cracks a smile, confirming that the system really does stack damage from consecutive hits. Satisfied, Yi Fan walks back, fully believing that no one there would be able to top his strength. The jealous blonde kid tries to downplay the feat by saying it was just a combo trick. Next, the instructor calls Bai Xiaochan up for the test. Trying to hold it together since she has a special class, she takes a deep breath and channels all of her magical energy. She unleashes a powerful gust of wind. However, the screen shows a measly 31 points, leaving the poor girl frustrated with her support class's lack of offensive power. The blonde kid instantly bursts out laughing. Next, the Storm Mage steps up and fires his wind missiles, hitting a respectable 72 damage points. Right after, the Earth Knight advances with his heavy shield, hitting the 69-point mark, and the Hammer Warrior unleashes a crushing blow on the machine, locking in 84 points. In the end, the students lament that even the best couldn't break the robot, but one of them remembers there's still the Necromancer, so all eyes turn to Fang Zhou, the last one in the class to take the strength test. Seeing his rival step up, the blonde kid instantly mocks him, betting that the loser couldn't even squeeze 10 points out of the robot. But our boy isn't fazed and asks if his rival is really that sure he won't be walking away with the reward. Confident in Fang's defeat, the jealous guy throws down a challenge and promises to eat the iron robot whole right there if Fang manages to break it. Hearing that, the Necromancer accepts the challenge on the spot. Wasting no time, the kid walks to the center of the courtyard and politely asks all the students to step back a bit. The blonde kid thinks it's just fear of embarrassment, but Fang Zhou warns that his ability just needs more room to be unleashed. Suddenly, currents of dark energy rise from the ground, and an army of skeleton warriors starts materializing. The whole class panics, unable to believe a freshly awakened student could summon 10 creatures at once. The instructor breaks into a cold sweat, remembering that even the greatest necromancer in history could only summon 5 at the start of her journey. He wonders if this young man's talent is really beyond anything the world has ever seen. The best part is that Fangs was still holding back to avoid drawing too much attention. With a command, our necromancer orders his creatures to start attacking the metal dummy. The warriors charge in like lightning and start unloading a violent flurry of punches against the machine's frame. At that very moment, the machine's damage counter starts skyrocketing, going from 30 to 65 points. The students whisper that despite all the noise, the damage was still small for a necromancer class. The blonde kid takes the chance to laugh again, mocking that the average damage per individual skeleton is a joke. But the necromancer warns that was just the beginning. Fang Zhou decides to raise the stakes and, in the blink of an eye, doubles his summons to 20 skeletons. The crowd is shocked by the overwhelming power. The new horde crushes the test robot mercilessly, sending the scoreboard soaring and shattering the 100-point strength barrier. Suddenly, the machine explodes into 1,000 pieces, launching the scoreboard through the air, showing the max value of 999. Now the students are shouting that Fang is definitely not a normal human. The jealous kid is shaking from head to toe, unable to comprehend how a lowly necromancer pulled off a miracle like that. That's when our necromancer calmly walks through the wreckage and picks up the metal head left over from the robot. He holds the piece out toward his rival and reminds him that, as agreed, he can start eating now. Fang says that if he doesn't want to eat the scrap, that's fine too. But he tells the scumbag to get out of his sight forever. Humiliated, the blonde kid runs off with his tail between his legs, but swears he'll make him pay dearly next time. As soon as his rival takes off, the adorable Bai Xiaochan comes over, begging Fang to reveal his training secret. Right after, Instructor Lu Hu approaches clapping, praising the kid for his unbelievable display of power. The professor puts a hand on his shoulder and promises he'll do everything to get him onto the school's exclusive elite list. Meanwhile, in the principal's office, the director goes over the general report, satisfied with the high awakening rate of the new students. He runs through the names of the rare classes that showed up. The old man plans to put all these special students directly on the institution's priority talent list. However, when he comes across Fang Zhou's file, the director hesitates because of his theoretically weak class. He concludes that a necromancer has no promising future and decides the best thing to do is leave him off the list. That's when Instructor Lu Hu walks in, announcing he has an extremely urgent matter to report to his superior. Wasting no time, the professor starts flipping through the files and pulls out Fang Zhou's, strongly recommending that the kid be added to the elite list immediately. The director disagrees, reminding him that necromancy is a class that's tough to level up, despite the record of another legendary warrior. He reveals he's the father of that warrior and claims she's only strong because he personally trained her with insane resources. The old man remembers that Fang's parents were war heroes and friends of Lu Hu, but warns that's not an excuse for favoritism. He stresses that the elite list carries huge responsibilities and can't be handed out without strict criteria. To make his point, the instructor hands over the report from the kids' meditation and practical combat classes. Reading the data, the director is stunned to discover that the young man learned to meditate on the first try and summoned 20 creatures. Surprised by the ridiculous numbers, the old man decides to test the kid in a simulated battlefield before making a decision. The director is now curious to see just how far this young necromancer's talent can go. Meanwhile, outside the building, the little blonde girl keeps chasing after our necromancer to get some answers. She says it's unbelievable that he summoned so many warriors on his first try, but the kid dodges the question. After all, Fang can't reveal that this insane power is just a drop in the ocean of his abilities. Suddenly, the red-headed Yi Fan approaches, declaring that only Fang Zhou is worthy of being his rival from here on out. Alright, what an awkward scene. Our necromancer just turns his back, saying he doesn't have time to mess around with weirdos, but the redhead runs after him and points his finger, clarifying that it's not a lame challenge, but an invitation to train together. The redhead explains that, since he awakened a rare class, he needs a training partner of the same level to move forward with his scientific research. Our necromancer questions why on earth he should agree to help with this boring research. But Yi Fan quickly plays his final card, offering 10 contribution points on top of free housing and food for 2 weeks of training. And like magic, Fang Zhou shakes the redhead's hand, closing the deal on the spot. Wasting no more time, the redhead takes off excitedly, calling on the duo to follow him straight to his lab. On the way, the girl asks how he could accept that lunatic's invitation so fast, but Fang notes that 10 points is a lot. Deep down, the kid knows he needs to stack those points to strengthen his skeleton minions in the realm of the dead. The kid wonders if Yi Fan is a rich heir, but Bai Xiaochen reveals that the points were just an advance from the association. She crosses her arms and explains that the association charges a lot, and the redhead will have to pay back every penny in the future. She points out that, with all the redhead's insane spending, he'll probably spend 20 years buried in debt after graduating. Right after, the group arrives in front of an impressive tech building, and Yi Fan hurries them to get inside. Once they step in, they find themselves in a top-of-the-line lab. Fang quickly notices how the school really spoils the rarest classes. That's when a scientist in a lab coat introduces himself as Chen Qingshan, the head of the research association. Our necromancer quickly notices that behind the lab coat, this scientist carries the intimidating aura of a real war veteran. The professor explains that the sudden interest in the redhead came after a legendary demon hunter defeated a lord in the abyss. Because of that, the military academy set up this expensive facility to squeeze every ounce of potential out of the young warrior. Then he looks at Fang and reveals also went through his school record in detail. The scientist offers to set up a research group just for him, but freaked out, the kid turns down the offer immediately. After all, the last thing the kid wanted was to finish college drowning in debt for 20 years like the redhead. Accepting the refusal, the professor takes them out to the balcony and suggests they kick off the practical combat test in the arena below. As they walk down the stairs, Chen assures them that the place has safety barriers so they can fight without any real risks. He tells them they can each pick up to 3 combat pieces from the arsenal to unleash their full power. Well, Fang Zhou knows the demon hunter's speed and explosive damage are a real threat to his skeletons. That's why he decides now's the perfect moment to use his skill deduction cheat and bump up his power level. He pulls up the system's holographic screen and decides to invest his points to upgrade his main summoning ability. On the other side, the redhead takes off his leather jacket and brags that he's mastered his weapon, promising that even 20 skeletons wouldn't stand a chance against him today. That's when Fang pulls up the system's status panel. He equips a basic staff and an apprentice robe to boost his magic stats. Stepping into the arena, Yi Fan smiles and praises Fang Zhou's huge confidence, recognizing him as a real rival. But with a serious, intimidating look, the demon hunter warns that playtime is over. Yi Fan takes a huge leap and shouts that the power given to him by his association is beyond the necromancer's imagination. In the observation room, the scientists debate over who's going to win, betting chips on the redhead's brutal killer instinct. That's when instructor Lu Hu walks into the room by surprise, complaining that the researchers are jumping to conclusions way too early. The old man explains that he came to watch his students fight, assuring the scientist that Fang Zhou has real chances of winning the match. The scientist disagrees and points out that a necromancer's physical body is extremely fragile against direct attacks. On top of that, Professor Chen reveals that the redhead learned a rapid movement technique that would bring a big surprise to the test. In the arena, the redhead throws quick, dangerous slashes with his curved blade, forcing our necromancer to keep dodging non-stop. Fang Zhou is well aware that he needs to keep his distance to avoid getting sliced up. Sensing his rival's strategy, the demon hunter readies his weapon and warns that running won't help. He fires off his special energy arrow technique. That's when our necromancer focuses to start the barrier summoning process and activates the magic circle to raise his skeletal shield bearers. But the redhead is smart and keeps firing non-stop. One of the arrows explodes right in the middle of the magic circle, breaking Fang Zhou's concentration and interrupting the summon. Caught by surprise, the kid is forced to pull off a quick roll. Without losing focus, he touches the ground again and manages to summon his minions just in time to hold off the rest of the bombardment. Up in the command cabin, Professor Chen is impressed by the young men's brilliance and quick reflexes. He admits that even if Fang Zhou loses today, he's already secured his spot in the elite, but Instructor Lu warns him not to celebrate too early. The old man knows the kid is extremely calm and strategic, and definitely has an ace up his sleeve to turn the game around. Watching his bone shields get shattered by the arrows, the young man decides it's time to stop playing around. He raises his staff and activates his summoning technique at full power, unleashing a massive wave of spiritual energy. In the office, everyone gasps in shock as 30 skeletons appear at once, not understanding how he leveled up so much in just a few days. Even surrounded by the army, the redhead smiles and says now the necromancer is finally worthy of fighting him. Hearing that, Fang gets suspicious that his rival is still hiding some trick up his sleeve. Out of nowhere, Yifan charges in like a bolt of lightning, throwing a brutal spinning slash, which shreds the front rows of monsters. Yifan believes he's finally created the ideal distance for his plan. He takes a deep breath, channeling an insane amount of spiritual flames. Activating his shadow charge, the demon hunter shoots forward like a blur toward the necromancer. In the cabin, the scientist calls the fight, stating that no mage would ever survive a physical attack from that range. But Fang just gives a small smirk warning that he fell into the trap and conjures a giant bone barrier to absorb the impact. The impact sends the redhead flying backward. The evaluators panic when they realize the necromancer learned a legendary defensive technique all on his own. Dropping the barrier, our necromancer apologizes and says he'll need to use a bit of strategy to win the fight. To everyone's surprise, the kid drops his wooden staff on the ground. Instructor Lu Hu admits the kid's fighting style is extremely dirty. That's because the kid used an optical camouflage cloak to hide perfectly in the middle of his dozens of summons. Yifan is now completely unable to locate his opponent's real body. Desperate, he starts slicing through the monsters around him, shouting for his rival to show himself and fight like a man. Seeing he'd be worn out to death by that horde, the redhead decides to use his most destructive technique. He explodes a colossal pillar of spiritual energy, sweeping away every monster around him at once. The scientists can't believe he mastered such an advanced siege-breaking technique. Through the dust, the demon hunter spots a skeleton wearing the camouflage cloak and concludes he's found the real target. He leaps with all his strength. The redhead bets everything on that attack. From the ground, the minions just stare up at the huge green fireball plummeting from the ceiling toward them. Then an atomic explosion of green flames engulfs the center of the arena, cracking the ground and raising a curtain of smoke. As the dust settles, the redhead looks over the charred wreckage on the cold arena floor. Yifan brags about the victory, saying he respects his rival's power, but his hunter's pride wouldn't let him accept defeat. He calls for the medical team immediately, worried he didn't cause serious injuries to his classmate. However, when he looks up at the cabin, the redhead is thrown off by everyone's reaction, noticing that wasn't the face people make to celebrate the winner of the test. Puzzled by the silence, he slowly turns around to face the charred body, and to his absolute horror, the smoke clears, revealing the defeated target was just another common skeleton. Fang used a double disguise, dressing one of his skeletons in the camouflage cloak. Before he can react, several skeletons burst up from the sandy ground and grab his legs, pinning him completely in place. And in the blink of an eye, the real Fang Zhou appears right behind him, thanking him for the victory. With no way out, the redhead simply drops his weapon on the arena floor. Yifan declares his defeat. The kid collapses, lamenting that the energy drained from his final attack completely wiped out his physical strength. Seeing the state of his opponent, one of Fang Zhou's skeletons walks over and helps the poor guy up off the ground. A little awkwardly, the redhead thanks the monster for the kind gesture, but Fang tells him not to sweat it. It was just sympathy for the loser. The redhead is furious as he's carried off on a stretcher, swearing revenge, but our hero brushes it off, saying it was just a joke. Right after, Professor Chen approaches our boy, admitting that his power exceeded all his expectations. He praises the young man's tactics, promising he'll become a master strategist. Instructor Lu Hu takes the chance to ask if that bone barrier he used in the fight was a technique he came up with himself. That's when Fang reveals that he created two new techniques during his training, the flying spear and the bone shield. At that, Lu Hu delivers a violent slap to the kid's back to congratulate him. The instructor suggests testing these abilities on the lab equipment, and Professor Chen agrees to get everything set up. Our necromancer complains that he's out of mental energy for the test, but Lu Hu says that's the least of their problems. He opens a case full of vials, and the kid asks if the professor was handing out free beer in the arena. Without thinking twice, Fang Zhou starts chugging the mana potions down. With his energy restored, Professor Chen sets up the test robot and says everything's ready to begin. The metal dummy takes a guard stance, and Lu Hu orders the kid to use his attack magic against the target. Our hero focuses and materializes his new flying bone spear. He hurls the mystical projectile full force into the robot's chest, registering an impressive 85 damage points. The scientist is amazed by the damage, pointing out that was an absurd feat for an ability created from scratch. Next, the instructor says now it's time to test the defensive capabilities of his new bone spells. The test robot charges at the kid at high speed, but Fang Zhou blocks the strike perfectly using his bone shield, registering a great 80 endurance points. Satisfied, Lu Hu writes down the results, comparing his attack power to a mage's and his defense to an Earth Knight's. The professor gives the kid another hard slap on the back, saying he was born for this, and the poor guy asks him to stop. Scientist Chen suggests that, given the excellent performance of his spells, he should register the new abilities in the Federation's official repository. The The kid remembers that this repository is a central place where warriors use contribution points to trade for rare techniques. Professor Chen mentions that the lab has a direct branch of that database, which gets our necromancer very interested. Outside, Instructor Liu explains that, by registering the techniques, Fang can use his points to redeem whatever he needs in there. Wasting no time, the young man pushes open the massive wooden doors of the hall. Taking his first steps in, the kid is thrown off by the total darkness, wondering if that was really the right place. But suddenly, with a loud click, the lighting system in the huge hall starts activating automatically, revealing a colossal, luxurious library worthy of the immense power of the world's greatest warrior organization. Amazed by the place, the kid notices that pretty much every spell known to humanity is cataloged there. He walks over to a mystical pedestal and reaches out toward an energy sphere. The system screen confirms the successful registration, granting him 200 points and a permanent profit rate on anyone who uses his spells. Loving the passive income, the kid decides to explore the hall. While looking through the shelves, the kid finds a dusty book containing the basic skeletal meditation technique. He activates his reincarnation cheat and uses his stored soul points to analyze the spell's structure. The system detects that the technique can be upgraded and asks if he wants to spend his energy to start the evolution. When he confirms, a dark, chilling energy wraps around the kid's body. Suddenly, a colossal skeletal being appears in his mind through the spiritual connection. A notification confirms the successful upgrade. The majestic creature holds out its hand and offers a spellbook. Confused, the kid grabs the mysterious tome and wonders if it really was a personal gift from the underworld entity. The next second, the book floats in the air and starts releasing dozens of glowing runes, giving rise to the legendary meditation technique of the Skeletal Monarch, a divine-level spell far beyond human comprehension. The kid reads the description on the screen and smiles when he sees that his cultivation speed has doubled and all his summons are stronger. But he remembers that even the best spell in the world still burns a lot of mana, something that nearly ran out during his last fight with Yi Fan. Taking advantage of the fact that he now has plenty of leftover contribution points, he decides to look for some kind of energy regeneration spell. With that, Fang finds the mental presence technique and spends 20 points to get the learning tome. The kid analyzes the book and discovers that the passive spell speeds up mental recovery, plus regenerates mana instantly when activated. Finally, he uses 10 more soul points from his system to skip the whole tedious learning process. So then, an explosion of energy consumes the book, engraving the spell's secrets directly into his mind. The kid thinks that if he fought Yi Fan again, he could easily beat him using just a sea of skeletons. To improve even more, he invests 60 contribution points to redeem several basic spells that'll serve as templates for his future creations. But knowing that spells alone wouldn't be enough, he heads over to a relic showcase and decides to spend 40 points to buy F-rank gear. Immediately, he equips the Mage Apprentice set, made up of a hat, necklace, and rings that boost his mana and reduce his spell cooldowns. At that instant, the system notifies him that the set bonus has been activated, granting him an extra 10% to cultivation and skill proficiency. He opens his general status screen to review his progress, and concludes that the trip to the Federation's skill center was totally worth it. Suddenly, the imposing skeletal creature of his spiritual clone materializes out of nowhere right in front of him. Looking at the monster, Fang remembers a crucial detail. His bone partner also needs to master new abilities to fight well. Without hesitating, he spends 30 more points to redeem 3 books of physical combat and support techniques made exclusively for his clone. Even though he's happy, our necromancer laments that the place charges a fortune and starts wondering if he can find another rich punching bag to grab more points. Back in the main lab, scientist Chen Qingshan comes over and asks if the young man made good progress in his spell hunt. That's when the kid hears a shout echo through the room. It was the redhead Yi Fan, who throws a vial of mystical potion and demands that his rival drink it so they can have a fair rematch without any cowardly tricks. The demon hunter insists that his pride won't let him stay on the losing side, and he'll give it his all to win. With his eye on the extra points, Feng Zhou whispers to the scientist that, since this is extra training, the debt-ridden guy will need to pay him more points. The kid throws the potion back and mocks him, saying his rival should save the healing item, because he'll definitely need it very soon. Wasting no time, the demon hunter leaps in, throwing his most destructive ultimate attack. In the observation room, Instructor Lu Hu praises the redhead's quick initiative, but completely calm. Our necromancer just points his index finger up and activates his massive magic circle on the ground. The girl asks if he's just going to use the same basic technique to summon common skeletons as before. But Instructor Lu Hu quickly notices that the amount of dark energy the kid is manifesting is way too much to be the basic spell. Fang cracks a smile and whispers that this many summons would be something totally different from anything they've ever seen. Suddenly, a colossal spiral tower made of hundreds of skeleton warriors rises up from the ground. The clash of the spells creates an explosion of energy that shakes the whole arena. In the command cabin, the evaluators are shocked to see that the impact power was way greater than what was recorded in the kid's previous fights. As the smoke clears, our necromancer appears out of nowhere, right next to his opponent's ear, praising the power of the attack he just threw. Fang starts walking calmly, saying his spells got just a little bit stronger. Before Yi Fan can even move a single muscle to defend himself, a skeleton appears right in front of him. Poor Yi Fan tries to beg the skeleton not to hit his face, but the monster ignores him and unloads a violent combo. With his rival completely knocked out, scientist Chen decides to end the sparring and announces that the redhead will be out of training for a week. Then, the professor takes the opening and asks if Fang plans to open a necromancy association, but the young man refuses the offer immediately. Deep down, the kid knows that if they started digging deep into his powers, they'd end up discovering his secret system, which would be a huge problem. Sometime later, at the Federation Skills Center, a beautiful young woman named Su Xinyan walks through the hall. When she touches the pedestal's mystical control panel, she's shocked to notice that an unknown necromancer has registered brand new techniques in the system. Curious, she spends 20 contribution points on the spot and redeems the new abilities to analyze the secrets behind their creation. Reading the tomes for the Flying Spear and the Bone Shield, she's amazed by the ingenuity of the spells and praises the developer. Excited by that unbelievable discovery, the beautiful necromancer decides to rush off and tell her father the news as fast as possible. Meanwhile, in the office at Haicheng High, instructor Lu Hu walks into the meeting room once again to bring up an important matter. He and Professor Chen try to convince director Su Tianquo that Feng Zhou has more than enough talent and urgently deserves a spot on the elite list. But the director dismisses the idea, claiming that a necromancer won't have strong enough skills to learn in his future career. But the old man spits out all his tea in shock when Chen reveals that the young prodigy has already understood and created 2 new necromancy spells on his own. The director tries to hide his surprise, saying creating skills means nothing if the effect is bad. That's when Su Xinyan bursts into the office, revealing that 2 new and powerful necromancy spells have just appeared in the official repository. To prove her point, the girl channels her mana and materializes the mystical versions of the spear and the shield. With that, his daughter asks if he knows who the brilliant creator behind those incredible spells is. The talented young woman proudly declares that she wants to find this mysterious master and become his disciple. However, the director tells her she'll never be able to have him as her master, which leaves the girl pretty confused. The old man explains that the creator is actually just a student at the school. Out of nowhere, Fan bursts into the room, pointing his finger and demanding a new battle. Fang asks how many times his rival needs to lose before he understands that he should focus on training and cultivating his own skills. But the redhead promises that this time, things would be totally different. He brags that he trained a lot thanks to the little blonde girl's help, but she quickly calls him out, revealing that he begged her on his knees to accept. Fang asks what kind of help she gave him, and the little blonde girl explains that she learned a new special support ability called Lullaby. The girl details that this passive technique dramatically speeds up mental recovery and boosts the effects of any training or meditation. The redhead slams the table and adds that, even though he can only use the trick 3 times a day, he burns contribution points every week to get this help. Our necromancer asks if the loser plans to spend the rest of his life buried in debt to the association just to try to beat him. But suddenly, the kid starts wondering if this training acceleration bonus from the little blonde girl would also work on his skeleton clone in the underworld. Immediately, the kid grabs Bai Xiaochan by those shoulders and asks if she'd be willing to sell him her remaining daily uses of her lullaby. The blonde guy shouts, telling them not to ignore him, but our necromancer doesn't care at all, extends his arm and starts the mystical summon of his monsters. Fang orders his rival to play a bit with the common skeletons, and warns that when he's done, he'll need to transfer his valuable points. Now, our necromancer finds a quiet corner and asks the adorable little blonde girl to use her lullaby on him. So the girl activates her power and starts floating as a magical melody of green notes wraps around the kid's body. At that same moment, in the gloomy swamp of the realm of the dead, his imposing skeleton clone sits down to absorb the spiritual energy. Then, he checks his stat table and quickly spots an enemy skeleton warrior approaching, being the perfect target to test out his new ability. So then, Fang's monster channels mana into his right hand and instantly creates a sharp spear coated in energy. Activating his mystical parrying shield, the clone blocks the heavy strike perfectly, reducing all the physical damage taken. Then, the warrior activates his combat mastery. The clone uses the enemy's own club weight as leverage to leap over the target. Using his special reverse thrust technique, Fang's skeleton pierces through and shatters the opponent's armor. Absorbing the soul from his rival's ashes, the clone gets bonus stat points and celebrates the 10% boost given by the buff. But the calm doesn't last long. As 2 huge monsters come running in, the warrior spins his spear and executes a brutal transverse slash with his mystical blade. In the blink of an eye, both giants are cut in half at once, guaranteeing a double gain of strength and energy for him. Looking further ahead, the warrior notices he'll have to face a whole legion of undead soldiers, so the clone opens his jaw and lets out a bizarre roar, ordering the whole army to charge at once. Activating his mystical war cry, the shockwave shakes the underworld floor and temporarily boosts all his physical stats. He keeps tearing through the creatures non-stop, collecting an absurd amount of soul points, until a bizarre feeling makes the warrior stop. Out of the wreckage, an imposing winged bone creature reassembles itself in the air. Wielding a huge sword, Before him appears the feared Bone Angel, a colossal divine-level boss that definitely should not have shown up in the beginner hunting zone. The colossal Bone Angel hovers in the air and raises his huge sword with both hands. The creature delivers a brutal strike against the ground, causing a devastating explosion of rocks. Knowing that a single impact from that giant blade would be enough to destroy him, Fang's skeleton quickly backs off. Since defending is totally pointless, the clone decides to take the initiative and runs at full speed straight along his rival's blade. Mid-run, the warrior activates his Shadow War Cry. He takes a huge leap toward the monster. Activating his shield break stance, the clone delivers a violent thrust and activates his brutal strike ability to try to tear off his rival's limb. He unleashes a frantic, violent combo of continuous attacks on the same spot, shattering the angel's shoulder bones with precision. After the devastating combo, the clone jumps back to create some distance, but to our necromancer's horror, the angel rips off his own damaged left arm without hesitating and comes at him again. The clone uses his parry technique to try to block the slashing attack. The force of the impact is insane, and the wind generated by the blade starts shredding the ground. Fang Zhou is thrown far away. In the real world, Fang's physical body takes the backlash from the spiritual damage and starts coughing up blood. Then, the clone gets back up, and despite everything, he feels relieved that he'd ripped off his rival's arm earlier, or he would have been wiped out right there. That's when he spots a blue spiritual flame glowing in the Bone Angel's chest, the monster's weak point. The colossal boss gets back into position and starts channeling a massive amount of dark energy. The creature begins spinning his body at high speed, creating a devastating tornado of dust that sweeps across the entire area. The whirlwind advances, destroying everything in its path. The clone realizes the enemy used the centrifugal force of the spin to make up for the lost arm, making it impossible to aim at his weak point. The deadly whirlwind heads straight toward the clone. To make things worse, our boy reaches the edge of a deep cliff. With the cutting tornado closing in fast and nowhere to run, the situation looked completely hopeless for Fang's skeleton. With no other choice, the warrior decides to bet it all on one final charge. Enduring the overwhelming pressure of the wind that starts tearing splinters off his bones, the clone concentrates as hard as he can to find an opening. Thanks to his sharp combat perception, he finally spots a small flaw at the center of the tornado's rotation. Activating his charge ability at maximum power, the skeleton launches himself like lightning. Fang says his opponent is huge, but clearly suffers from chronic osteoporosis. With the impact of the charge, the creature's ribcage cracks wide open, exposing his glowing, vulnerable core. Seizing the perfect opening, the warrior conjures his legendary flying spear technique and aims straight at the weak point, but the monster manages to block it in time with his wing and starts channeling immense mystical energy around his sword. But the kid isn't intimidated and activates his fusion system, combining his web spell with the skeletal weapon crafting technique. The process is a total success, unlocking the powerful imprisonment spell of the bone shackles. The mystical fusion can generate even more brutal control spells. Targeting the enemy, the skeleton points his finger and gets ready to test his new trick. That's when bone chains appear out of nowhere and start wrapping around the Bone Angel's body. The colossal boss is dragged out of the sky and straight into the ground. Taking control of the situation, Fang walks over calmly and points his spear, warning the monster not to try resisting. He says his opponent's desperation only gets him more hype to kill him. Then, the battle comes to an end. Absorbing the core, he gets 100 soul points, but notices that his current body's stats have hit their racial limit. The kid looks up at the vast red sky and decides he wants to find out what's beyond that swamp. Without hesitating, he uses his stored points and clicks the option to start his clone's evolution process. At that instant, a dense, terrifying black smoke wraps around his body. As the power consumes his bones, an immense blue energy explodes and confirms his successful evolution into the special class of Bone Warrior. His combat stats take an insane jump, boosting all his basic attributes by 30 points. To top it off, the system reveals that the clone's new body unlocked the exclusive passive talent of the Bone Monarch. The new blessing grants the kid a massive damage bonus against the undead and heavy damage reduction against enemy attacks. While our hero checks out his new strength, a small, frail skeletal creature sneaks up quietly behind him. But Fang is now so powerful he doesn't even do anything, and the little skeleton's own attack makes his club fall apart. With that, our necromancer realizes he no longer needs to worry about weak enemies. Suddenly, the system surprises him with a new notification, revealing that even his weapon crafting ability can be upgraded. Quickly, the fusion is completed with total success, unlocking the powerful defensive ability of the bone armor. The new protection fuses perfectly onto his body. Now the clone radiates a terrifying presence. He then approaches the small skeleton and warns him he'll just be used for some basic combat training. Ignoring the creature's panic, our warrior throws a punch at the speed of light. Believing this would be his tragic end, the poor thing curls up in fear and tries to shield his own head. But to the little monster's surprise, he realizes he's completely unharmed. Our clone tells him he only used the wind from the punch, which was strong enough to pulverize the whole army of monsters behind him. Seeing the small gains in the system, he notices that beating minions this weak week no longer really helps him level up. Now, he'll need to move on to the more dangerous zones of the underworld. That's when a pang of worry hits him as he realizes the fight against the Bone Angel took too much time. In the real world, Feng Zhou's physical body wakes up in the classroom. The adorable Bai Xiaochan runs over to steady him, asking if he really got hurt during his meditation trance. Our necromancer quickly gets that this was the backlash of the damage taken in the underworld, and vows to himself to be much more careful going forward. Trying to calm her down, he says he's fine, and that it was just a small hiccup while trying to channel his energy flow. But the calm is interrupted by Yi Fan, who shows up shouting that bone summons can no longer stop him. The redhead insists that he's finally mastered the power he needs to overcome his greatest rival. With an acrobatic leap, the lunatic charges full force into the middle of the room, but without moving a single foot, Fang Zhou extends his hand and instantly conjures his newest bone shackle ability. In the blink of an eye, mystical green chains of pure energy lock down the redhead's arms and legs. With that, our necromancer walks right past and tells him to save up some points before trying another fight. Meanwhile, the other students whisper about the kid's frightening strength. Even the adorable little blonde girl wonders what the true limit of Fang's power might be. Oblivious to the rumors, our necromancer walks calmly down the outer stairs of the main building. The kid is surprised at how fast the week went by. He realizes he'd been so focused on training and cultivating that he'd forgotten it was already time to pay a visit to his old home. To get ready, the kid decides to make a strategic stop at the imposing Federation Resource Exchange Department building. Standing before the clerk at the counter, he asks to convert 10 of his hard-earned contribution points into 100,000 coins of real money. The clerk warns him that contribution points are hard to come by and questions whether it wouldn't be a waste to swap them for cash, but the kid insists he needs the money now. Understanding the situation, she hands him a fairly heavy brown briefcase, offering herself for future resource exchanges if the young man ever needs. A little later, the kid arrives at the Yunduo orphanage. That's when a beautiful young woman named Ruru approaches, wondering how many of the kids there would be able to awaken in the future. Fang cracks a smile and lets her know he's finally back. At that same moment, a group of kids comes running toward him begging for food, and the young woman tries to hold them back. But the kid tells her he brought enough for everyone. Right after, Ruru timidly asks about the result of the awakening test that took place at the school. The young man reveals he awakened as a necromancer, and the girl celebrates in relief, saying the important thing was that the test was a success. The little ones overhear the conversation and start gossiping curiously about the class, thinking that summoning skeletons is the coolest thing in the world. And to the kids' delight, our necromancer uses his mana to summon 2 weakened, cute versions of his skeleton warriors. Setting the fun aside for a moment, he holds out the heavy briefcase of money to Ruru, asking her to hand it directly to the director. But the peaceful moment is suddenly interrupted. A hostile-looking man appears walking slowly toward the two of them, with a far-from-friendly smile. The orphanage has been surrounded by a horde of armed, dangerous thugs from the feared local gang. The young woman runs to confront the jerk, reminding him that the payment deadline was still a few days away. But the brute loses his patience immediately and shoves the poor girl hard to the ground, shouting that she shouldn't be late on the gang's payments. Pointing his finger aggressively, the scumbag declares that if they don't pay the debt today, the orphanage's land will become their property. While the bully laughs, a little orphan girl named Xing starts crying at the sight of the situation. That's when the little girl runs at the lunatic and headbutts him. Annoyed by the interruption, the coward raises his foot to kick the poor girl. But before the impact, one of the small bone summons appears like lightning in front of the little girl, blocking the kick. Placing his hand on the girl's head, our necromancer steps forward and demands that the coward apologize immediately. One of the thugs runs over to whisper in the ear of the leader, Liu Hu, warning him that the kid in front of him is actually a feared class holder. That's when the brute reveals his martial artist class and crushes the small skeleton with a devastating blow. Approaching Ruru, the kid asks who those men are, and she reveals that they're from the Tiger Claw Training Equipment Company that's been extorting the place. Ruru reveals that they took out a loan to buy training equipment, but the legit company behind the business was just a front for loan sharking. She explains that the crazy interest made the debt impossible to pay, and Fang gets angry that she didn't tell him about the situation sooner. The gangster tells the kid not to butt in on their business, mocking him and saying 100,000 coins is a sum he could never pay. But without saying a word, the kid just tosses the heavy briefcase of money at the criminal. Fang warns him that the 100,000 coins are in there and tells them all to get lost. The thugs open the briefcase and confirm in shock that the amount is correct. However, the gang leader tells his cronies to shut up and tosses the briefcase back onto the ground, refusing to accept the payment. Liu Hu mutters that his boss's real goal is to take the valuable orphanage land. He points his weapon, but our necromancer fires back, stating that the place's debt has already been paid in full. Taking advantage of the delay, the gang leader holds out his hand and claims that, because of the accumulated interest, the new debt is now 500,000 coins. Ruru panics at the outrageous amount, but Fang, on the other hand, just cracks a smile. The bully laughs and shouts that miserable orphans like them don't deserve to live on land as valuable as that. Liu Hu orders his men to charge in and take the land by force, mocking the gang's attempt to beat him with numbers. The kid activates his mystical power and starts summoning his real creatures. Unlike the weakened versions, powerful skeleton warriors rise from the ground, giving off a killer aura. Fang and his shadow army demand that the criminals get on their knees and apologize, or face the worst consequences. Trying to lift his crew's spirits, Liu Hu shouts that necromancers are the weakest class, and that any of them could destroy the bones. Pumped up by the boss's words, the thugs break through the fences and storm the place. Meanwhile, little Xing Xing starts crying, begging for someone to save them. Irritated by the gang's cowardice, our hero takes a combat stance and orders his summons to charge and tear the enemies apart. One of the criminals leaps in with his spiked club, unloading a brutal strike straight at one of the warrior's skulls. But with insane reflexes, the skeleton easily dodges the attack and executes a perfect transverse slash with his sword. But like a good skeleton, he covers the eyes of one of the kids so she doesn't see anything. Liu Hu can't understand how a mere student was able to summon such powerful creatures. Determined to handle things himself, the boss leaps in, unleashing his special ability. Ruru shouts for Fang to dodge, but the kid doesn't even flinch. Fang blocks the colossal impact perfectly by raising his powerful mystical bone shield barrier. Seizing the opening, our necromancer extends his hand and conjures his bone shackles, restraining the brute with chains in midair. In a swift, ruthless move, the kid slams the villain's body violently into the stone courtyard floor. Even immobilized, the scumbag still tries to shout insults and threats at the young man. However, his rage is silenced instantly when two huge bone warriors cross their sharp swords right at his throat. Fang gives off a deadly aura and demands that the coward kneel and apologize or face death. That's it for today, guys. I really enjoyed this necromancer messing with everyone, and it was super satisfying to see Fang turn the tables like that. So my rating for this manhwa is a 9. If you want part 2 of this story, just let me know down in the comments and I'll bring it to you. Thanks so much for watching all the way through, and see you next time.